kind of what we're doing. So today's class starts the 12-hour new agent course. And so this class, for those of you that are newly licensed, within your first 2 years, the division requires that you attend a 12-hour new agent course. And then they have specific things laid out that this is what needs to be covered during the 12-hour new agent course. And what happened actually, so I have been training for the last 15 years. And during that time, I had agents that would have to miss class to go over to the board to attend this 12-hour new agent course. And then they would come back and I would say, so how was the 12-hour new agent course? And they would tell me, it was actually kind of boring because you had already taught us everything that we needed to learn in the 12-hour new agent. And essentially what I was doing was teaching them what we're going to talk about today. And so it gave me the idea of, well, maybe I should just go get approved to teach the 12-hour new agent course. So I did. I went and got approved for that. So now how we do it, how this is going to work is typically if you go sign up for this 12-hour new agent class, the way they do it is it's usually 2 full days where you're 6 hours each day to get the credit. The way that I've got it designed, where we do typically Tuesdays and Thursdays is typically how we do the classes anyway. We will just do it as 2-hour blocks over 6 classes. So basically think of it as starting today over the next 3 weeks, we will cover the 12-hour new agent both on Tuesdays and Thursdays for the next 3 weeks. Now, here's the catch. So it's good news, bad news, meaning if you've ever gone and sat in a 6-hour long class that is going to be talking about essentially what we're going to do today, it's not a lot of fun. So the good news is we're not doing it that way. We're breaking it up over basically 3 weeks to get all of this in 2-hour segments. The bad news is if you miss any part of it, I can't give you. So this is you either get credit for 12 hours of CE or you get credit for 0 hours of CE. So just kind of keep that in mind. I know that there are some that have to go do like the orientation or whatever, and you can do it on Zoom for the time being. Eventually the division will take that away to where it's got to be done in person, but they haven't done that yet. And so you can do it and be on Zoom. So you either need to be in person here, like a lot of you guys are, or on Zoom, which is another huge chunk of people are. So it's got to be one or the other. But you have to attend all of them to be able to get the 12-hour new agent credit. Now, so for the people that are on Zoom, if you guys will put in the chat box your first and last name as it appears on your real estate license, and then your license number as well. So the people that are here with me, there's a clipboard going around that has all of that on it. If you'll put in first and last name and your license number, and I only need it at least, I only need the license number one of the times. So you don't need to write it down every single time I will have you sign it every time, but I don't need you to put the license number every time, but I do need at least one time written on there. So if you didn't bring it today, it's fine. I guess really what I'm saying. All right, let's see. What other housekeeping things we got to talk about with this? I think that's probably it. So, ultimately, there are a few pieces, though, that the division requires that we talk about that I'll point those out. Or these are some of the things the division wants to make sure that you know of. For me, the idea of this is I taught this class, what we're doing today, before the division ever implemented this 12-hour new agent course. And the reason I did is because the agents need the information. And I'm not saying that the division decided to do this 12-hour new agent thing because of what I was doing. That's like, I doubt there was anything to do with that. But I do think they decided there were certain things that people needed to know, which I already agreed with because I was already teaching it and doing that. So that's why I say a lot of the stuff's just going to be stuff that I felt like an agent needed to know. And in fact, here's probably where we'll start off today with is the division requires that we spend 4 hours talking about the real estate purchase contract. And so we're going to cover 2 of those, 2 hours today. And then if I remember right, it's next Tuesday, but I could be wrong. So one of the classes coming up is we'll have Rob Oakey, who's one of the owners of the company. He'll come in and spend the other 2 hours on it. typically I like having Rob's go first, but he's in Mexico this week, so we should all feel bad for him, but he's in Mexico this week. So we had to swap those. But so the idea of today's is more of a workshop. And here's the idea behind it is one of the things that I learned a long time ago is 13 out of 14 people who start into real estate will be gone within 2 years. So 13 out of 14, high attrition to people leaving the business because, and here's what I found actually. Well, actually, you guys tell me, let me get you involved here. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that it's so high of a failure rate? Tell me your name.
Melanie.
Melanie, okay.
I believe, and I have been in the business for a while, and I believe that there's more balls to juggle than a real estate agent ever anticipates. You have to be very good with your money and how you have to understand that you may have 3 transactions right now, but you will be unemployed after that time if you don't have something in the pipeline.
Yep.
And there's just so many things that you have to juggle. You could have the best intentions, be the best real estate agent you can be, but you've got to have all things rolling at the same time.
Good. Love it. Thank you, Melanie. Mm-hmm. What other thoughts?
Yeah. You need patience, dedication.
Okay.
And just, stay focused.
Okay, good. And for you guys on Zoom, feel free to unmute and participate too. So what other thoughts?
I said they don't treat it like a business.
Okay, good. I like that. That's good. Any other thoughts?
I think burnout can happen really quickly.
Yeah.
Good. That time to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Everything you guys have hit on is going to be a piece of it. Here's what I found though and we actually did a study on this years ago on a company in California. That what we found is that the number one thing that you will hear, and I would agree long term with what I'm about to say, but the number one thing that you will tend to hear in this business is, if you want to survive, you've got to be taking listings. Listings is the name of the game. Now, that's even more so true in today's market, meaning I can't believe some of the stuff that I'm hearing of how far above list price people are offering, and then there's 4 offers better than they are. Like, it's crazy. But the name of the game is listings. Well, here's part of the challenge though with that is what ends up happening though is because a new agent comes in and hears that and hears that listings is the name of the game. What happens though then is they think, I'm going to go out and try to get a listing. Well, the problem with a new agent trying to go get a listing is they're typically not as willing to work with a seller on price, meaning be as firm of saying, no, you'll never sell. It's going to be overpriced. And so what ends up happening is they tend to not get the good listings as a new agent. They end up with the listings that are overpriced that aren't going to sell. And then they end up leaving the business, and they leave the business with a listing, which is counter to everything that we've taught, meaning we say, go get listings, and they go get a listing and then they go out of the business. Well, so here's what I have found actually. The secret to somebody surviving in the business early on is getting in front of a real potential buyer as soon as you can. So if you have not done that, that really should be your target is I need to get in front of a buyer as quick as I can and write an offer. Now, here's the interesting thing. In the study that we did, it actually didn't even matter if the offer got accepted. But if you could sit down, so the good news is, I just said, people are writing offers and not getting them accepted. The good news is if you can get in front of a potential buyer, real one, write an offer, even if it doesn't get accepted, the chances of you surviving in this business go up dramatically. Now, why? Why would that be?
I guess you're just getting a lot of experience in such a crazy market, especially with writing offers.
Okay, good. Yeah, you're on the right track. So here's what happens is typically and this was true for me too, by the way. When I very first started, the first offer I was going to write, I was like, well, what if I do it wrong? Because in real estate school, did they teach you how to really do real estate? No. What they teach you to do?
Stay out of jail.
Yeah, pass the test and stay out of jail. That's exactly it. Those are the 2 goals they had. Keep you out of jail and teach you how to pass the test. So as a result, we come out of that. We're now licensed. and we don't know what we're doing. And so for me, the idea of this class, so here's that the whole buildup of everything I've been saying is the whole purpose of what we are going to do today is to help you feel comfortable in writing an offer if that is a fear that you have. That's the objective of today. All right, so with that, I'm going to pass out to you guys that are here. Let me pass these around. And for you guys, hopefully on Zoom, I sent out an email. Hopefully it made it to everyone, but if not, I'll share it in the chat box here, which you should be able to download unless you're on a phone, and then you won't be able to. Did you? Okay, perfect. Now, here's what I want you guys to do. So I want you guys to, and you can pull this first page off if you want to, but I want you to go through this, and behind this cover letter, actually, let me get it shared with you guys on Zoom. So, okay. Does anyone on Zoom need it? I guess that maybe is even a better question to ask, is do you need me to share it?
I don't have it, but if it's a bother, it's okay.
Oh, I'll share it in the chat box here. Give me 1 second to find it. And then I'll also show it on the screen as well. So, okay, should be in your chat box there, but I'm also going to pull it up on the screen so that you'll be able to see it.
Got it. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, so here's what I want you guys to do is for you guys that are here with me or on Zoom, either way, but is take a few minutes and go through this. And so you pull that first page off and go through the purchase contract. And what I want you to do is there are a bunch of mistakes in there. So I want you to go through and find the errors that were made in filling out that purchase contract. So, and then what we're going to do, so I'm going to give you 10 or so minutes, however long you guys need, to go through that and take a look at the errors. And then from there, we'll go through and talk about what the mistakes were and how you should fill it out. So again, the idea of today is to help you in understanding how to fill out the purchase contract. And so the first page of this is the MLS printout, which is a fake one that I just made up. And if you'll use that as kind of your guide as you go through it. And then I'll be back in 2 hours, and you guys can let me know what you think. And for you guys on Zoom, once you're done, if you'll just throw in the chat box that you're done, I'll kind of try to keep an eye on that so that I can see. I want to give you enough time to go through it, but. Not to me.
I have.
Yeah. Yeah, I probably do need to update that and do a higher price.
Yeah, at least double. Even 2015, I was
That
like,
probably was,
Ogden.
that probably in 2015, probably was
Really? 250?
for the house, that particular house that I showed. It probably was. Yeah, I'll bet it was higher.
I just know it's like the Ogden area. My dad was working over there. It's not
Yeah.
like 5%. We used to have like 4 to 10. 80,000 auctions. Now it's like just consult. Yeah. It's just too expensive.
All right, how you guys doing on Zoom? You need more time? All right, I'm seeing a few on goods. All right, well, let's start going through this then, and we will. If you didn't quite get all the way through, that's all right. We'll still talk about it. So, okay. Now, so do you guys want, you guys all have it. You can see that's all right. You want lights off. You good? Okay. I'm gonna leave them on then so that I can see. All right, so here's the idea of this is ultimately, I'm gonna just, we're not gonna spend a lot of time. Like I say, typically we usually have flopped this, meaning you will have already spent 2 hours with Rob Oakey going through the details of the sections of the contract kind of a thing. And then I usually come in and, okay, now let's talk about how to fill it out. And so I'm not going to spend as much time. And in fact, really, for the most part, anything that doesn't have a section to be filled out, I'm going to skip it today, unless if you have questions on it, please ask. I want to talk about it. But more than likely, Rob will cover that in later. But also don't feel like you can't ask a question. So if you have any, I want to talk about it. The idea again being is I want you to be comfortable with how to fill this out. And here's what I will actually tell you. At the end of this, I say 2 hours, but we're going to be done at 11:30 actually. So, because I have an appointment. So, but typically we will be somewhere between 11:30 and 12 on each of these that we'll finish. But the idea is an hour from now, you are going to be more comfortable and know more about how to fill out this contract than most agents out there, believe it or not. I know you might not necessarily believe that, but that's kind of where we're going to get to, okay? All right, so here's where we're going to start. Is I'm going to just ask you guys if you have any concerns with how each line is filled out, and then we'll talk about whatever I feel like you need to know about that section, if there is any, okay? So on this first piece there, it says on this 9th day of October 2017. Any concerns with that? Okay, so what do you mean by Jamie? It's different than the date on the other one. One's 2015. Oh, that's the way it's dated. Yeah, so this been, yeah, so we would just assume this has been on the market for 2 years. But yeah, nothing wrong with that. It's so here's the thing, is on this date in here, typically you're just going to put whatever day you're filling out the contract. But here's the important piece. You'll notice right off to the side of that, it has right here in parentheses, offer reference date. So here's what I want to make sure you understand on that is going forward, any addendums that you fill out will ask for the offer reference date. And most agents don't know what, like they're going to put in there typically the date it was signed, which more than likely is probably going to be the date that you put up here. But notice that by having that in parentheses there saying offer reference date, any other place throughout the contract or on specifically is where you're going to run into it as addendums, where it asks for the offer reference date, it's referring to what's the date that you put right there on the contract, okay? So just know that as you're filling out addendums or counter offers, on those addendums and counteroffers, it asks you to put the offer reference date, and it is going to be the date you put there, not the date that it was signed. Meaning it's possible that I filled it out tonight, intended for my clients to sign it tonight, but they don't sign it till tomorrow. Well, if that's the case, then the offer reference date is going to be the day you put in on that line, not the day they actually sign. Okay? Okay, good. Next is it's got Billy Bob Buyer. Any concerns there? Yeah, probably not at this point, right? Because you don't really know anything as far as meaning if who the buyer is. Now, so what name should we put here? Meaning, how do we know if I'm sitting down with a couple to write an offer, how do I know what to put there? Meaning, like, for example, I go by Russ, but my name is really Russell. So do you put Russ or do you put Russell? Okay, so how do you decide?
Look at their driver's license.
Okay, good. So potentially could be we look at their driver's license. That's probably gonna work. Here's what I recommend though, is find out how they have applied for the loan. Because here's the reason for that is, however they apply for the loan. So if they're going down to Inspiro to get their loan and they applied as William Robert Buyer, then we should have it say William Robert Buyer on this section of the contract. Now, the reason for that is, and we haven't seen it as much lately, but back in 2009, 2010, 2011, after the downturn that we had, the Great Recession, I guess, after that time frame, lenders were looking for, and in fact, actually, let me just explain it to you this way. When a lender gives a loan on a property, if for some reason that property is foreclosed, so meaning the buyer quits making their payments for some reason, typically most mortgage companies will they'll originate the loan, but then they usually sell it to somebody else to process that. Bless you. Now, what will happen then is in the event that that loan goes bad and they have to foreclose, they're out money. Well, what that lender will do then is go back to the loan originator to see, did they do something wrong out of the gate that they can then go back and say, you have to buy this loan back from me. So in essence, the loan originator can end up being the one on the hook for the loan going back. Well, an example of that would be little things like, oh, well, you wrote the contract said Billy Bob when it was really William Robert. Now, like I said, I don't think there is being as strict on that currently as they have in the past, but it was not uncommon back in those times to write an offer and then have to go do an addendum later on to correct it to match how they applied for the loan. So just think of it that way, is ultimately what you want on this is, have they applied for a loan already? And if they have, what is the name that they applied for the loan in? And then I'm going to put that here. So if it's a husband and a wife, I want both of their names the way they applied for the loan. If it's a husband and a wife, but only she's going to be on the loan or only he's going to be on the loan, then I want to have just their name and how they did it. Make sense? All right, next. Offers to purchase from, and then it's got Sally Sue Seller. Any concerns there? How do we know what to put for the seller name? Where do we get that?
On the listing, it says owner and bottom.
Okay, good. So yeah, so the first place I always want to look is on the MLS, on the listing, it has owner. Now on this particular one, it doesn't have anything in there. But if it did have the owner's name, then I would put it in from there. Since this one doesn't, how else could we get it?
Ask the agent.
Okay, good. So one of the things that I'm going to recommend to you guys is to, there's a few things that I say you should, anytime you're going to write an offer, you should call the listing agent before writing the offer. Always, in my opinion, always. Now, it doesn't happen very often. Remember I told you guys you're going to be trained better than most? Most agents, when they write an offer, their form of communicating it to you is the email that it comes over in. Like that's their extent of communication. So I would recommend always call the listing agent first and I'll walk you through a few things to ask as we go through the contract. But one of the questions to ask is, what do you want me to put for the seller's name on the contract? Okay. Now, the other way you can get it is you can go to county records. So on the MLS, if you click on up here in the blue where it's got the tax ID number, if you click on that, it'll bring up the tax information. That's generally correct, but it's not 100%. So that's why for me, I recommend just call the listing agent and saying, hey, I'm going to be writing an offer. What do you want me to put for the name of the seller on there? Okay. All right, good. Next then goes down to the earnest money of $1,000. Any concerns there? Yeah, go ahead.
Typically, do people like agents, do they choose whatever earnest money they want, or do they set it with 100% of the purchase price?
Yeah, great question. So it's whatever they want to do. Yes, is the answer. But a good rule of thumb is 1% of the purchase price. Now, a lot of times on a first-time purchase, like in this scenario here, if you were writing an offer on a 250, it was not uncommon for somebody to do $1,000. But to some extent today, even it's almost like people are doing $10,000 and it's non-refundable, and on a they may be doing 2%. So, yeah. So that's kind of the way to think about it, is just it's what do we have to do to make the offer look stronger is kind of what we want to do. Now, there's a little bit of that scares me of everything that's going on in the market today, meaning of people doing $10,000 of non-refundable, is because I probably at least 2 or 3 times a month recently, since the first of the year, I guess. So in the last, 4 months, I've had 2 or 3 times per month that somebody's come to me and said, we wrote the offer and we did it non-refundable, but now we want to cancel. How do we get the earnest money back? It's kind of like, and there have been a few scenarios that we've been able to look through and see, ooh, there is this one little out you could potentially use to get out.
But if you have the non-refundable and say the seller backs out, they get their money back though, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, because, and the reason for that is in section 16, where it talks about default. So if the seller were to default, then the buyer has these options available to them. So, yeah, because otherwise, yeah, you're right. Otherwise, I'm going to go list my house and I'll just keep accepting offers and then cancel and keep everybody's non-refundable earnest money. That might be a new strategy. No, I'm just kidding. Okay. So good on what?
That's why it's been up.
That's why it's been for sale for 2 years. That's right. All right. So $1,000, and we've talked about in the form of, and then I put personal check number 567. Any concerns there?
You have to put the number in the personal check.
Yeah, good question. So the answer is no, you don't need to. Now, I'll tell you, and granted, times have changed a little over this, but back before we were doing a lot of this stuff electronically, the way I was trained to do it was that you put the check number on. And here's what would happen is typically you would sit down with somebody and you would write an offer with them sitting in the conference room. And when we would get to this section, I would say, okay, how much do you want to do for earnest money? We would talk about it. They land on $1,000 and I'd say, okay, how are you going to do that? Are you going to give it to me in a check? And they would say yes. And I'd say, great, what's the check number? What do you think people had to do as soon as I said, what's the check number? Yeah, they'd have to pull out their checkbook because like they didn't know. And so they would pull out their checkbook and then they would typically just write the earnest money right then. So if you ever are writing one in person, I still would recommend to do that, even though they may go, I don't know, I don't have a check. I don't even have, like, Jane, do you have a checkbook? Do any of you guys have a checkbook? All right, so see, that's why, so that's where it is. So it doesn't matter too much. But so then if that's the case, if my client doesn't have a checkbook, how are they going to get me the earnest money? Okay, good. So one option is to go to the bank and get a cashier's check, which is fine. But so here's the point. The point of this is when you get to in the form of, have the discussion with them about how they're going to get it to you, okay? And the other option is we can use that earnest, the online way for them to put the money in as well. So whatever that's going to be, though, just put in here, this is how they're getting there. It's going to be in the form of a cashier's check, or they could go get a money order. I mean, whatever it is. But what we don't want to do is, well, there's 2 things we're not going to do. Is one, we don't want cash. So and that's more of from a company's position, we don't want cash, which kind of funny side note to that. One day I was walking through the office, this was years ago, and an agent was standing at the photocopy machine with all these $100 bills, making photocopies of these $100 bills because that's what they've been given as earnest money. And I was like, I think you should be making photocopies of the money, especially in color. No, I'm just kidding. But so we don't want cash. So if they want to give you cash, have them go to a bank and get a check. Or the other thing we don't want to do, and this is again just as a company, our personal decision, is we don't want them to wire us the earnest money. So, and I'm not saying you couldn't do that, but as a general rule, we don't have them wire us the earnest money either. Okay, so it's typically going to be they need to go get a check, or they could use that earnest system to send it to us. Okay, all right. Good. Next section, down to offer to purchase the property. Any concerns with the address? So any of those lines that have the address on, any concerns?
123 Easy Street.
Uh-huh.
123 South, 555 West.
You could really do it either way. But here, that actually brings up a very good point on this and this goes again back to a lender coming back if the loan went bad, is typically they want it to match whatever the post office has, basically. So in this scenario, I think they would want to see it as the 123 Easy Street rather than the other way around with the coordinates. Okay. So, but like I say, again, some of that stuff, I wouldn't stress too much on this. I would put whatever's on the MLS as the address. Just know if during the process of the loan, they find that it's different. Like I'll give you an example of where you may see this. The home is on a corner lot. And so like even my house, actually, I'm on a corner lot, and initially the house was supposed to be built one direction, but the garage wasn't. I couldn't do a 3-car garage if it was faced that direction. So we had to turn it the other direction on the lot in order to get the 3-car garage to be able to fit. And so luckily the address on mine still is, but I've seen scenarios where actually at the post office, they have as if the house was turned a different direction. If that makes sense. Okay. So, but start with just whatever it has on the MLS. If the lender finds that it's different at the post office, they'll call you and go, hey, we need you to do it again, change the address. Okay. So just kind of keep in mind if you mess something up, you can typically always fix it by an addendum, but that's not always going to work out though. Meaning, like if you put in here the price to be $547,000 and you meant 200, it's not like you could go back later on and be like, oh, sorry, like we accidentally forgot or we messed up. We want to change that. That's probably not going to work. But something like an address being wrong or the name needing to be changed differently, you're not going to typically run into an issue. Although in our current environment, if a better offer came along, it could get, if you came back to a seller going, hey, we need to do an addendum changing the seller's name, they could just say no. If the seller wants out of the deal, they could say no, we're not going to do that. So back to your question, somewhat Mary, is they could go, yeah, no, we're not going to agree to that. Well, now you did $10,000 non-refundable earnest money. If you can't get the loan, is that the seller's problem? So again, for the most part, though, you can fix anything. Okay. All right. Everything else is good in that section. Let's go down to section 1.2. So as I said, I'm going to skip over some of these. If you have questions about them, let's stop and talk. But section 1.2, any concerns there?
Refrigerators.
Okay. What about?
That's excluded.
Okay. All right. So Mary's brought up that on the MLS, it says the refrigerator's excluded. I've got the box checked for the refrigerator included. So what is it? Okay.
Right? Or you have to, if you wanted the refrigerator, you could set them, that you want to have them.
Okay. So why would I need to put in a addendum?
Because it's excluded on purchase, so it's kind of like you asking for it.
Okay. So you're on the right line. You're on the right line of thinking. We don't need to do an addendum though. If I just check the box on here, essentially, and I'll tell you why I did this way, is essentially you're asking for the refrigerators by putting it on. So think of it this way, and the reason I set this up this way is because it is not uncommon. Remember, I told you guys you're going to be trained better than most agents out there. There are a lot of seasoned agents that have been around for a very long time that if you submitted this offer and they accepted it, but they didn't mean to, they would come back and go, no, the MLS said it was excluded. Well, which of these, if there's a conflict between the two, which one wins? This wins. So now, so here's the whole reason I put that on there and did it this way is you guys on Zoom will have to potentially remind me to keep scrolling up for you to see stuff. So if I forget, let me know. But here's the reason I did that is it is not unusual for a listing agent to put on there, the seller said, I don't want to include the refrigerator. They put it on the MLS as refrigerator's not included. The agent filling out the offer though says, my buyer wants the refrigerator. And so they check the box for a refrigerator. Now, here's what typically happens. Most agents, this is what happens. I get this offer in. I'm so excited because I need the money. And so I get my offer. And what's the first thing that you typically as an agent are going to look at when you get an offer? Purchase price. Because what?
Money.
Yeah, I want to know, are we going to be able to get this offer accepted? So typically, I first look at the purchase price and I go 247, our list price was 249, close enough. Then what's the second thing you look at? Yeah, for me, the next one is what day am I getting paid? Is where I usually go to. So the first thing is, am I going to get paid? Because are we going to be able to put the deal together? The second thing I want to know is what day am I going to get paid? Oh, okay, November 14th, sweet. All right, great, damn, let's go meet with the seller. Now, here's the problem, and a lot of agents learn this the hard way, is don't just look at those things, like meaning, okay, how much is it and when am I getting paid? Also stop and look at if there were things that were excluded, make sure that the agent writing the offer didn't put them as included. And it's not even necessarily that they're trying to be sneaky. I mean, they may or may not be, but they're just saying, we want the refrigerator. And so checking that box here would now mean the buyer's getting the refrigerator. So you as an agent will end up paying for a new refrigerator if that happens, typically is what ends up happening, because you're the one who messed up on it and your client seller saying, hey, we didn't want to include the refrigerator and now we have to, so you get to buy us a new one, okay? Now, so here's the key thing with this. When I go out and list a property, and I know we're talking about the REPC today, not a listing, but when I list a property, if my seller said, I don't want to include the refrigerator, a lot of times I will say, and refrigerator may not be the best example of this, but let's say it was a ceiling fan or something. I tell them to get it out right now. And probably the best example I can use with that is I had listed a property and they had this shelf on the wall. And the seller said, I'm not, everything is that's attached is great except for that shelf. I want to take that shelf with me. So I put on the MLS in the remarks, shelf in the kitchen, not included, or will be excluded. I don't know how to word it, but not included. Well, they wrote the offer and then they did an addendum saying, or they checked the other box here, I don't remember which, and put shelf in the kitchen to be included. Well, then I go present it to the seller and the seller's like, well, I said I didn't want to include it. Well, I know, but they're saying that they want the, so I called the other agent, hey, they really don't want the shelf. Well, my people, they probably won't buy the house if you won't leave the shelf. Like, it's stupid, the stuff that people do. So what I found is if now if I go on a listing and somebody says, I don't want to include the shelf, I say, great, get rid of it now. Because then there's not an issue. The very first offer I ever wrote for a buyer was very similar to that. The MLS said stove not included. Well, sometimes the buyer just feels like it's this, like, I want to win. And so my buyer said, we want the stove. And it really came down to we won't buy the house if you don't include this stove. And luckily, this was a job transfer. So the husband had already moved to, I don't know, somewhere back east. And luckily, he just said to his wife, I'll buy you a new stove when you get here. Just let, it was an $800 stove. Just let him have it. So, but here's the point. When you're on the list side, make sure you're checking this stuff. Here's the other thing to keep in mind. Notice that on that refrigerator, it says refrigerators. plural. So sometimes a seller will say, well, we'll include the one in the basement, or the one in the garage, but we're taking the one in the kitchen. Well, if they check this box, which one are they getting? Both. That's right. So just keep in mind, there's an S on the end of washers, dryers, refrigerators, microwave ovens. It's all plural. So if the seller's thinking, well, that's great, we'll include the one in the basement or the one in the garage or whatever. If they check the box, they're getting both. Okay. All right. Did I beat that one up enough? All right.
So you
Next.
just put it in the other, for whichever one you want.
Yeah, which that actually is not a bad idea. If for example, if I were writing the offer, I mean, it's not a bad idea to check it and say, you know, the whatever, you know, detail it out a little bit better for sure. So, but like I say, sometimes an agent may just check the box because it already says refrigerators, and if I want both of them, do I need to detail it out? But if I'm on the listing side and I got that in as an offer, I might counter it back and say the refrigerator, the whatever LG and whatever model number in the kitchen's not included, but the one in the basement is or something. So, yeah. All right, good. Just below the other line there is an R and R not. So it has the above checked items will be conveyed by a separate bill of sale, and there are or are not additional items of personal property that the buyer intends to. So you here's the point: you got to check one or the other, right? So either you are or you are not. Okay, so just don't leave things unchecked. All right, what about excluded items? Any concerns there? Yes.
Just a question, so the refrigerator, wouldn't that be considered a personal item rather than part of a fixture
Yes.
of the real estate?
Yep.
So could they have described down here the refrigerator itself?
You could, like I say, for me, if I'm on the buyer side and I'm wanting them, I just check the box because I'm saying I want both. So, I mean, you could, no question. If you want to make sure there's no misunderstanding, that's not a bad idea to spell it. So. All right, section 1.3, excluded items. Any concerns there?
It lists range on that MLS.
Okay.
So I feel like I would enter that there.
Okay, good. So yeah, so here's how I usually think about it. If on the buyer side, if I'm the one filling this out and there was something I didn't want, I'm going to list it there. Meaning, so if they have excluded as the range here and my buyer doesn't want it, then I'm for sure going to do that. Or let's say that there's a swing set in the backyard and I'm like, I don't want that swing set left behind. I'm going to list swing set or whatever. So typically for me, if the buyer doesn't care, if they were like, yeah, if they leave the range, that's fine. If they don't, then that's fine too. I probably just wouldn't address it and just see what happens, like if they didn't care. But if there is something specific, they want to make sure, no, I do not want that range or whatever, then I'll list it. So good. All right. Section 1.4, water service. Here's the key thing on this. Is that this says the purchase price for the property shall include all water rights, water shares, if any, that are a legal source of the seller's current culinary water service and irrigation water service, if any. So that's the key piece is if there are that are a legal source, this contract is saying that the seller will include those. Okay. So if your seller has water shares or water rights and they don't want them transferred, then you need to list them down on the blank line because it says the following water rights / water shares, if applicable, are specifically excluded from the sale. So you'd want to list that they're not. But,
Can you give an example of when that would happen, when they would keep their water shares? Say,
Yep.
like a house?
yeah. So my sister, she owned a property up in Charleston, which is kind of by Midway and Heber, and I went up there to help her sell the property. When they bought the property, they also had to buy a share of water for the land. But during the time they lived there, the city came through and put water meters in. So essentially what that meant is they had free water up to a certain amount, the 1 acre worth of water. But then after that, if they used above that, they just had to pay for it. So as a result, when I went in to help her sell the property, you didn't need the water share anymore in order to use the water. You just paid for, it was a pay for whatever you use. So when we listed the property, I had put in there that she would sell that if they wanted to buy it, but it wasn't going to be included as part of the purchase. Well, when we got the offer, it looked just like this, where it was saying, hey, include it. So I did a counter offer saying the water share is not included, but could be purchased outside of closing if they wanted to. And actually just the interesting thing that happened with that was the buyer said, well, we'll think about it and get back to you. So I told my sister, hey, they'll think about it and they'll get back to us. Well, they thought about it after 2 or 3 weeks. I don't remember what it was, but it wasn't a few days. It was a few weeks later. They called me and said, hey, they do want to buy that water share. So I said, okay. I called up my sister. Hey, they do want to buy it. Oh, I already sold it. I was like, thanks a lot for consulting me. But she had just talked to the neighbor, and the neighbor said, oh, I'll buy it. Okay, so they sold it. So anyway, it didn't ever affect anything. But that would be an example of a time where they were like, you don't really need it anymore. Yeah. So versus when they first bought it, it would have been like, you need this in order.
How would you sell that? Would that be a bill of sale, or would it?
Just a separate bill of sale. Yep. Okay, good. All right, section 2 then. Any concerns there on the purchase price? On any of those blank lines that are filled in?
I think it doesn't add up.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It doesn't. So here's the point of this is make sure when you're filling it out that you are filling it out. Now, a lot of times people will just put in, this is what I see a lot of times. Earnest money, $1,000. New loan, TBD. Balance of purchase price in cash at settlement, TBD. Purchase price, $247. Like, to me, don't be lazy, is I guess what I'm saying is put in there what the plan is, especially in today's market, is it's going to make a difference on being able to have your offer accepted or not. Meaning if you're showing that you're putting a huge down payment, if I'm the listing agent, I'm going to lean more towards that. So I have had scenarios where I've had multiple offers where I ended up telling the seller, let's go with this one because they show a large down payment versus the other one just said TBD. Well, I don't know what you're going to do on it. So anyway, make sense? Go ahead, Mary.
Okay, so when it says earnest money deposit and then additional earnest money deposit, if you're doing, say, $2,000 upon acceptance and then 8,000 extra at due diligence, would the 8,000 be an additional
Correct.
Earnest money?
Yep.
Or would it be altogether 10,000 earnest money deposit?
No, I would do it as the additional earnings. The 8,000 would go in the additional earnings. Why? Did you do that wrong or somebody else?
Yeah.
That's okay. That's okay.
But if it's in the addendum, that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, then you're fine.
So,
Yeah, because an addendum is going to clarify it, override. So,
should have called you.
instead of who?
I won't say.
Oh. You won't say his name, but he's just sitting over there.
No, I'm just, no, the person that told me to put that.
Yeah, no, it should be down there.
Yeah, I asked that. No, just put it all 10,000 earnest money deposit.
Yeah.
I was like, well,
Yeah, no, you were correct and you were thinking.
okay.
All right, good. So section 2.2, any concerns there? Which shouldn't be. So is not. Yeah. Now, in the event you check the is though, then it's notice the very last sentence on that says if checked in the affirmative, which you guys on Zoom didn't tell me to scroll up. Are you guys there paying attention? I think I'm supposed to have you on Zoom put something in the chat box so I know you're still there. So put in I'm still here in the chat box if you're still there. And if you're not, then if you don't put that in, then I can't give you credit for the class. So. All right. If you do though, notice it says if checked in the affirmative, the terms of the attached subject to the sale of buyer's property addendum apply. And a lot of times agents will think if they just check the box is that they don't need that separate addendum, but you do. Okay. All right. Any other concerns on that page? Oh, you guys are still there. Good. Any other concerns on that page? All right, let's go to page 2.
All
Only
the
took us-
pages are missing the dates. So is that important?
Oh, good. Oh, yeah, good point. So Gabe brought up that it doesn't have the date section filled out, but on a lot of the electronic stuff now, it puts it automatically below. So if you notice on the, yeah, right below it has it. So it's fine that it's not written in there. Yeah, great question. All right, next page. We got 30 minutes to get through the rest. No, you're good.
With the is on 2.2.
Yeah.
Is, what's the addendum that you have to put?
Yeah, good question. So if you read on there, it says, if checking the affirmative, the terms of the attached subject to the sale of buyer's property. So there's a separate one that is called subject to the sale of the buyer's property. I think it actually is subject to the sale of the buyer's residence is I think actually the name of it. They may have changed it to be property. Yep, so there's a separate one. All right, page 2. We're gonna skip to section 3. Actually, no, I'm gonna stop at 3.2 real quick, just because I want to point something out to make sure you guys understand. Notice in section 3.2 that it says what closing is. So we a lot of times, and I'm guilty of this too, guys, I say to my buyers or my sellers, hey, we're gonna close on Friday, we're gonna close on Tuesday or whatever. Well, technically, closing is, and it's defined here. So for the purposes of the REPC, closing means that these things took place. A, settlement has been completed. B, the proceeds of any new loan have been delivered by the lender to the seller or to the escrow closing office. And C, the applicable closing documents have been recorded in the county office of the county recorder. And then it says the actions described in 3.2 B and C shall be completed no later than 4 calendar days after settlement. So within 4 calendar days of signing, you have to get the money there and to get it recorded. Okay, so I just always want to point that out to make sure everybody's on the same page with that. All right, section 3.3. Any concerns there?
And it notes that it's possession upon recording, but the buyer, I mean, it doesn't really matter if the buyer wants 24 hours, right?
Perfect. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. So, and there's not a right answer on what to put in here for possession, meaning like I typically, although again, the market we're in right now is really screwy, but typically for me, I will either check upon recording or the 24 hours after recording. I want to keep it short because who's responsible? Once they sign and it funds and records, that closing takes place. Who's responsible for that property? Yeah, the buyer, the person who just bought it, is now responsible for it. But if the seller's still there and something happens, they light it on fire or whatever. I mean, so you want to kind of keep it shorter. Now, the hard part is in today's market though, people are you can have 60 days for free after, and so you got to do what you got to do to get your offers accepted. But as a general rule, I like to keep that shorter, but
I have a
we're
question.
seeing some screwy stuff.
Let's say if they want a lease back option, could you, instead of like have it free for them, instead of writing that in the addendum, could you just put it through this and just say, hey, after
60 days.
6 whatever calendar days, that's when we'll get the possession? Or would it be smarter with liability since you're it's your home now? Would it be smarter to put that lease back option?
I think you're better to use the lease back option personally, but you could just put it in the 60 days here. But yeah, typically if you go more than 60 days, the lender's not gonna like that because they're saying you're buying this as a primary residence and looks more like an investment property if you're doing all that. So yeah. Good question. Okay, next, section 4.2. Any concerns there? Yeah, so typically, again, on this one, this is another one that I've had my license for how long? 26-ish years. And until this year, till just 2021, I would have, every time I've taught this class, I would have said, always just check seller. But I think in today's world, you're seeing a lot of the buyer will be responsible for any special assessment to try to get their offers accepted. So again, just recognize though, when you're doing that, if there are special assessments, make sure you know what they are because the buyer will end up paying for them if you check the buyer box there, okay? And I usually will tell a story about, I helped a nephew of mine buy a property that we had checked that the seller's responsible for special assessments. And sometimes people will say, well, it's not part of an HOA. Well, that doesn't necessarily matter because it could be some other municipality as well. And on my nephews, they had done that. Utopia had gone through down in Orem and put in fiber or whatever, and the seller still owed money on that. And they tried to get the buyer to pay it, but I said, no, we had checked that the seller is responsible, so the seller aren't paying. All right, go down to section 4.3, C. Any concerns there? So same concept again, is typically I would recommend doing seller, but in today's crazy market, you might have to do buyer to get offers accepted. Saying, and just make sure on all this stuff that the buyer understands what they're agreeing to, like meaning the whole $10,000 non-refundable stuff. Too many times, oh yeah, we'll do it. And then, like I said, I get 2 or 3 times a month, I've had people come to me, okay, what do we do to get their earnest money back? Yeah, you're probably not getting it back. So just make sure they understand, same kind of a thing on this. If there are other fees that are involved, who's going to pay it? Okay? All right, section 5. Any concerns in section 5?
The box is not checked on the buyer for Century 21.
Good. Yeah, that's the only concern on here on that one is that under the buyer's brokerage here, Century 21 Everest, there's not the box checked there. And the reason I did that, I haven't seen it so much lately, but for a long time, that was probably the most common mistake I would see agents make in filling out a REPC is they would forget to check that box, not just a box, that one. And I don't know why it was, but I haven't seen it. I think it might have been a glitch if you were using to fill it out on the MLS. I think it was a glitch on the MLS because it was always people had filled it out on the MLS and they were like, oh, I know I checked the box, but when they went to print it for whatever reason. So anyway, that's why I built it this way. But just making sure that you're checking those and checking it accordingly to who it should be. All right. Anything else on that page? Anything concerned with initials? All right, let's scroll down here. A lot of this stuff, like I said, I'm skipping this because Rob will cover all the seller disclosure stuff. Buyer's due diligence. Any concerns with that in section 8.1? Which again, in today's market, a lot of times people are checking is not. We're not even making it contingent upon inspection, which it's going to be interesting down the road to see how many lawsuits come out of all this stuff against brokerages and stuff, because the buyer is going to be saying, well, you told me I had to do that. I would have wanted to do an inspection, but it is a catch-22 though, because if you put it and make it contingent upon that, you're probably not going to get the offer. So they have to do it to get the offer, but they're going to probably come back later on because it's not their fault.
Certain loans require an appraisal or an inspection though, right?
Correct.
Okay. So.
Well, I don't know that any are going to require an inspection,
Okay.
but a lot of times the loan is going to. Yeah, unless you're putting down 20% or more. A lot of times, if you're putting down more than 20%, they'll do an appraisal waiver.
Oh, okay.
And so that's what a lot of people are banking on. So for example, I've got a property in North Salt Lake right now that we're supposed to close this week that the buyer's putting down like $300,000. And I was a little worried on the inspection, or excuse me, the appraisal, but we got an appraisal waiver because of the amount of money we put down.
Do you apply for that or?
Nope,
No.
just the lender.
The lender, okay.
And ultimately they're looking at it going, you're putting that much money down on the property, we'll be able to sell it.
Yeah.
Which is true. Okay, so section 8.2, the appraisal is or is not. And again, on that, a lot of times people right now are checking the box saying it's not conditioned upon it, which would be different though of what you're saying is the lender may require it, but if the buyer checks the is not, it's just they can't cancel based on it. So if it doesn't appraise, they're just out to earnest money if they can't do it. Okay. All right. Any other concerns on that page? Okay. 8.3. Any concerns there? So when would we do the no financing required check? When would we check that box?
Cash.
Yeah, pretty much if it's going to be cash, right? So But again, somebody in today's world, you might even be getting a loan and check. The buyer's obligation to purchase is not conditioned upon them obtaining financing. Even though it probably is, but anyway, all right. And then section 8.3 BI, where it has the 0 in the blank line there. Any concerns there? So when would we, or what would it mean if we put some money in there? That's right. Is any amount that you put in there, if you canceled after due diligence, but before finance and appraisal, you would lose that amount of money. So, make sense?
So that the same as what she was saying, like that extra 8,000.
Nope, it's different. That's gonna be an 8.4 here. So this one is just saying of the 1,000 that we did in the beginning, if we cancel after due diligence, but before finance and appraisal, we'll lose, in this case, $0. But if we had put 500, it would be saying, if we get past due diligence and then we cancel based on finance, we're gonna lose half of it. Make sense?
So I would put 2,000 there and then the additional 8,000.
Well, you would only put 2,000 here if you're saying if we cancel at, what?
Well, I'm doing upon acceptance,
Oh,
2,000 and then 8,000.
you're making the 2,000 non-refundable
Right.
upon acceptance. I would do that in an addendum. Or if you had, I guess actually, if you did put in section 8.1 that it was not conditioned upon due diligence, and then put in the 2,000 there, it would be essentially accomplished the same. But I think, again, I go back to most agents don't really know this contract, so I would do it just because then it kind of clarifies. Okay. All right, so now let's go to 8.4. So in section 8.4, any concerns there?
Did they check the wrong box?
Yeah, so one of two things. Either we checked the wrong box because we said will not, and then we put $500. So in essence, this is saying that we will not give you an additional $500, which would be like, well, okay, why are you telling me that? But, so yeah, and maybe just throw them off. Be like, oh yeah, look at that. They're going to give us 500 additional. Yeah, we will not give you $1 million. So yeah, but this is what Mary was talking about before, is that if she had wanted to do the additional, you could have put the 8,000 there, check the box will, and then put 8,000 here. And then essentially what that's saying is after we get past the finance and appraisal and our due diligence, whichever's later, we'll deposit this additional. Okay, good. How about section 9? Any concerns there?
Missing addendum 1.
Okay, good. Yeah, so we checked the box that there are. We checked the box that there's an FHAVA addendum, but we did not check the box for an addendum 1, which there was. So good catch. All right. Section 10, home warranty. Any concerns there?
The $510, isn't it usually 500? But
Could be. Yeah. So yeah, it doesn't matter. You can put any amount in there. It doesn't matter. The way that I typically, again, the market we're in right now is kind of backwards from everything, but typically the way I fill it out is I will check that there will be a home warranty. It will be ordered by the buyer, paid or selected by the buyer, and paid for by the seller. And then just put in the amount of whatever it's going to cost for you to be able to get the home warranty that they want and the coverage. So kind of the point of me why I put that in that 510 is check and find out to make sure that it's going to cover whatever home warranty you're wanting to get. So, yeah.
Hey, Russ, can you please scroll down?
There we go. Thanks, Alan. Any other concerns on that page? Okay. Next page then. We're going to skip down to section 15. Any concerns there?
gotta check one.
Yeah, you got to check one. So which one should we check? Shall or may?
Say May.
Okay. Mary says may. Is that because it's just your name down the line? Just kidding.
No, it's just,
I'm just kidding.
it's cheaper. They don't have to pay for attorneys and stuff if they can just work it out. But
Okay.
shall is like, they're doing it.
Okay, good. Anybody have differing opinion? All right, so let me explain it this way. When I,
It should be shall. It
Say
should be shall, because if they do medication, they can always litigate after, but at least they're going to try to resolve it before they head into a lot of litigation costs.
okay, good, thanks,
But
Rick.
I don't know what Century 21 advises, but
Well, I'm about to tell you, okay?
okay.
So here's the thing. So when I first started training this, we had an attorney that this was at a different company, not Century 21. But when I first started teaching this class, I had an attorney that said to me, you should tell people that they should always check the May box. And he said, the reason is because most disputes are over the earnest money. And it was back then, it was always $500 typically. So he's like, it's just not worth the effort. Well, then he quit and we hired a new attorney. And that attorney came in and heard me teach the class one day and he goes, whoa, whoa, whoa. No, you don't want to do may, you should teach shall. So then for the next few years, I would come into this class and I would say, all right, check the shall box. Because if there's a dispute, which is basically what Rebecca just said, if there's a dispute, you want to go to mediation first before going to court because it'll be cheaper than going to court potentially. Okay, so I taught it that way. Well, then that attorney left and a new one came on and that attorney said, why are you teaching shall? And I said, well, because the last one told me that I should. And he said, well, I don't think you should tell them what to check. So the reason I left it blank for me teaching you guys on this is what this last one's attorney said, and I think this one's the right answer. He said, explain to your buyer the difference between shall and may, and then let them decide. And so ultimately,
That's the best.
yeah,
That's
ultimately,
the best.
yeah, ultimately, the best thing to do is just say, look, shall means you have to go to mediation. In fact, if you tried to go to court, a judge is going to look at it and say, have you been to mediation first? And if you hadn't, he's going to kick it out, go do mediation. If they like that idea, then check shall. If the client says, you explain to them, hey, you have the option, you still could, but you could also say, I don't want to for whatever reason. So may be what you want to check. Now, here's my experience though. Your client's going to say, so Caitlin, what should I do? That's usually what they're going to go, okay, but what do I do? Yeah. Well, I just explained to you, here's the difference. Okay, but well, what would you do?
Mr. Buyer, I can't make the decision for you. I can just be your information resource.
Yeah, so I usually a lot of times will joke with them and say, and this isn't the only time I'll say it, but I'll say this to people. This is where we have to apply the golden rule. The person with the gold makes the rules. So you're the one with the money, you got to decide. Is like, that's the golden rule. The person with the golds make the rules, all right? All right, just kidding. But for me personally, I'll just tell you guys, me personally, if I were filling out a contract, I would probably check me personally. And that's only because most of the disputes that I see take place over the earnest money, and I don't want to go to mediation to eat up that cost. Now, with that being said, though, there are scenarios that if you checked may, you're going to wish you had checked shall. So that's the hard part with this when you're filling this out of should the client, like honestly, this section is probably the hardest one for me in terms of training it to you to be able to say what you should or shouldn't do, because I would personally say most of the time you're going to wish you had checked may. But there's going to be scenarios that you're going to wish you had checked shall. So I guess ultimately, if it's going to be a bigger issue, you're going to wish you had checked shall. If it's a dispute over $1,000 of earnest money, you're going to wish you did may. And the hard part is, and this is probably the way to explain it to the client, I don't know what your dispute's going to end up being. Is it going to be a small issue or a big one? And so you may want to err on the side of doing shall, because if it's a bigger issue, you're probably going to wish you had done shall. And I guess here's the other thing I would say. As we, like on Thursday this week, we're going to go through the seller packet. And when we go through the listing agreement, guess what we as a company have put in? Shall. Says if there's a dispute, we shall go to mediation first. So I know I've just talked on both sides now. I personally like may, but if you look at the way the company does it, we must like shall because we put shall in our contract. So.
But it's better to have the client make that decision so they don't come back on you.
That's right. And I just think explaining it to them, there are going to be scenarios that you're gonna wish you had done one or the other. And ultimately, you know, which you're gonna have to just decide which way you think you're more concerned about. So anyway, and then like I say, you could point out to them, hey, well, look at this buyer broker that you just signed. It says shall. So that gives you any idea what you want to do. All right. Any other concerns on that page?
The buyer's initials right there.
Yeah, good. Buyer's initials were missed. So here's my point on that. The reason I left this one off, before you submit or before you, if you're using .loop, send this to your client to initial and sign, always scroll through before you share it to make sure you've got the boxes all checked and that they're going to sign. If you're signing it in person with them, before you let them leave, always just flip through each of the pages to make sure they didn't miss something. So that's kind of my point on that. All right, section 24. Actually, let's do 23 real quick. Even though Rob's going to do this one again, we're going to do it quick. What has to happen for acceptance, for somebody to have accepted an offer or account? Okay, good. So they have to check the box saying it's accepted. What else? They have to sign it. And one other thing. Communicate. Okay. So just remember, those three pieces have to happen in order for you to have an accepted offer. If somebody, and Rob will, well, I'm not going to say it. Rob's going to tell you a story about a scenario that happened where all three didn't happen, and it became an issue because one person thought they had an accepted offer when they really didn't. All right. Any concerns on the deadlines? Okay. So let me just kind of run you through how I typically think through this. I usually am going to put, now I'll put an exact date, but that date is usually going to be 3 to 5 days on seller disclosure deadline. I usually do between 3 and 5 days for the day I'm writing the offer. Now, how I typically decide that is based upon if I think, hey, we're going to have to go back and forth a few times to get this offer accepted, I'll probably put more like a 5-day date. If I feel like, hey, this is a straightforward offer, we're probably going to get accepted, I'll probably put 3 days. Okay, so that's kind of just how I think about doing it. Due diligence deadline, typically 10 to 14 is the time frame. So what from the date that I'm writing the offer. And again, I usually err on the side of if I think it's going to take a little bit to go back and forth, I'm probably going to put it 2 weeks from today. The other thing actually that plays into this too, for just kind of so you guys know, I always look at the dates that before I just, rather than just automatically put 10 days, I also look at the dates. And I typically, for me, tried to make sure like my due diligence deadline wasn't going to end on a Saturday or a Sunday, because I just didn't want to have to be working on those days. So like I, to some extent, look at your calendar and be like, okay, if I'm having to last minute do stuff by a deadline by 5 p.m., am I going to want to be doing it on that date? And so like, if not, don't put that as the date. Okay. So, but I usually 10 to 14. And so part of when I say 10 to 14 is again, looking at weekends, holidays, stuff like that, because I didn't want to have to deal with doing stuff. All right. Finance and appraisal deadline. Here's how I typically do it. Now, so what I will tell you, what most agents do, the way that I've seen it trained so many times, is to do a 7 days, 14 days, 21 days, and then 28. So like thinking in terms of 7, which is fine. Like that's okay. It probably works most of the time. I'll tell you how I do it. Typically what I do, back when in section 4, when we got to possession, was that 4 or 9? I can't remember. 3.3 possession. In section 3.3, when we got to possession, when I'm filling this out with a client, I usually ask them, when do you want to move in? Because that's how I'm going to decide on possession, is when do they want to move in? And then I back up from there based on settlement, because remember, you have potentially 4 days between settlement and closing and then possession. So I typically am going to start this whole thing back there. When I get to that section is when I'm asking the client, when do you want to move in? Then from there, I'm going to back into it. So if I know they want to move in on, let's say this Saturday, I'm typically going to put my settlement deadline to be either Monday or Tuesday, the Monday or Tuesday before the Saturday. And the idea of that is I want to give enough time. Are they ever going to complain if you get them the keys early? But are they going to complain if they're ready to move on Saturday and you did settlement on Thursday and then there was a hiccup, so it didn't fund and record on Friday, which means it's now going to be Monday, but they're ready to move on Saturday? So for me, I always do my settlements. I tend to try to do them on a Monday or a Tuesday when I'm representing the buyer. So if they want to move in on the Saturday, so that there's enough of a window in there if something goes wrong. But if it doesn't, and they're planning to move in on Saturday, but you can get them the keys on Wednesday or Thursday, hey, that gives them a day or two to go clean or whatever. I mean, you're not going to run into as many issues that way. So the biggest thing is make sure explain to them the difference between settlement and closing, because not everybody that comes from another state understands how we do it here. Meaning, in Chicago, you get the keys at the signing. You go sign, you get the keys. Like there's a lot of states, that's how it works. But on ours, typically, you're not going to fund and record till the next day. So it's usually the next day is the soonest they're going to get it. And what you don't want, in fact, I always laugh when I walk out of the office here, and this happens from time to time, and I see a U-Haul truck in the parking lot. I always kind of laugh to myself because I'm like, there's a buyer who thinks they're moving in today. I hope their agent educated them, because I'm telling you, you'll have somebody, if you don't, sitting at settlement and go, all right, well, we've got like our whole family over at the house waiting to move in. So when do we get the keys? Well, probably tomorrow, but it could be Thursday or Friday. And then they're like, what? Like, I've got a U-Haul sitting out here and we got to go unload it right now. So just make sure you're communicating. All right. So typically I'm going to, if I did the settlement deadline as, let's say today, since it's Tuesday, May 4th, I probably am going to put my finance and appraisal deadline to be the 3 days before that. So if I'm representing the buyer and looking out for their best interest, I base rather than a 7/21 or 7/14/21/28, I try to put my financing and appraisal deadline. Remember, the lender has they have to give them the closing disclosure 3 days before. I try to have my finance and appraisal deadline be the day that they are supposed to get the closing disclosure. That way, if they don't get the closing disclosure, I know I could still cancel if we had to. Does that make sense? That's my thinking. Doesn't mean I'm right, but that's my thinking. Okay. All right. Next, section 25. Any concerns on the offer and time for acceptance? And we got the initial. So we're good. Okay, good. All right, FHEV alone. On this one, so you'll notice it has, this is an addendum with an offer reference date, and we've got our offer reference date there. Got the buyer's name, the seller in there again, and we're missing part of the address. So I'm just going to help you on that one. So any other concerns on this form? The FHAVA addendum. Let me just point a couple things out there. So the seller shall make any and all appraisal required repairs provided the cost does not exceed whatever. So on a FHA, the appraiser will look for safety issues. And all you're doing is agreeing in advance, if there are things the appraiser wants fixed, safety issues, that the seller is agreeing up front to spend $500 towards fixing those. So there's not a right amount to put in there. For me, I usually look at more like, if it looks like it might need a new roof, like right away, I may put $5,000 in there. But if everything looks good, I usually just put at $500 that, in case they come through and say you need to fix a railing or something. The next one in section 4 is if they found that there were termites in the property, that the seller would spend up to X amount of dollars. Usually I will hear people say in Utah, we don't have termites. We have termites. It's just very, very rare that we run into an issue with them. So just know it's a possibility. And it's pretty rare that it happens, but it does. So I usually just throw $500 in there as well. Unless you really thought there was going to be termites, you might want to put a bigger amount. But, and then section 5 is how much the seller will pay towards buyer's closing costs. All right. I'm going to skip because there's nothing wrong with any of the rest of that. Let's go to the last page here, addendum 1. What concerns do you have on addendum 1?
Does it matter that the time is different from the other ones?
Good question. So on this one, it says the buyer shall have until 9 p.m. The other two said 8. So what is which one is correct? Okay, why?
Because the addendum kind of trump whatever's on the rep.
Perfect. Yep, and if you look right here, it says, to the extent the terms of this addendum modify or conflict with any provisions of the REPC, including all prior addenda and counteroffers, these terms shall control. So whichever one is last. Now, the only thing you could argue on this one is, was this one last or was the FHAVA addendum last? And so that's where the timestamp comes into play. But if you look at the timestamp on these, even, well, number one, this one wasn't signed. That's another problem. But it's exactly the same to the minute. So you can't really say. So, but I would just say you would go with the later where there's a conflict that way. You would probably be able to err on the side of 9 p.m. being the right.
So that means from the first page of that acceptance that was put on the 8 p.m., that means now the whole contract is based on 9.
Yep, the whole thing.
Because it's.
Yep, because, and so just always remember that, like this piece is crucial for everything, is to the extent the terms of an addendum, whatever the latest addendum is, modifies or conflicts with any other provisions, including prior addenda or counteroffers, these terms control. So that whatever's in here controls. Make sense? All right. Any other concerns on this page? There's a couple.
Yeah, what about, how are we going to define that the carpets were clean to the satisfaction of the buyer? Because I don't know. I mean, they might just clean the carpets and one person's nose is different than another person's.
Right.
I
Good.
think that's yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. So that's the main thing I would say on here is be specific. If you're asking, number one, don't offend the seller. Like, so I would not put to get rid of the nasty smell of cat urine or whatever, but putting in their seller to have carpets professionally cleaned by a company agreed to by the buyer, something, something that is a little more specific than just professionally cleaned, because they could go, well, I went down to Smith's and got a steam cleaner and I cleaned it myself. So like, if you're going to put stuff in there, be specific about it. So here's my point that we'll kind of wrap on is whatever you're going to put in there, make sure it makes sense. So I usually recommend, because we're not attorneys and we're supposed to be very careful creating addendums, have somebody else read it to make sure it makes sense. Because it'll make sense to you when you write it, but have somebody else read it to make sure it makes sense to them, that they understand what you're saying. Because it's very possible that they read it and go, wow, this is what I think it means. Does that make sense? All right. Any other questions? Okay. So for you guys that are on Zoom, again, just as a reminder, if you didn't put your first and last name and license number, please do that. Again, though, also just to say again, is it's a 12-hour, you either get 12 hours by attending all of the classes or you get 0 hours. So like that